Member for Higgins.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Australians are hardworking and patient. They have contributed to over a decade of healthy company profits and shareholder value. But precious little of that value has been returned to their own pay packets. Reciprocity has broken down. This is the social compact between workers and their employers. Australian workers are now running out of patience and time. They are in that pincer grip of rising cost of living pressures and stagnant wages. And in fact, that pincer grip has turned into a stranglehold. It is disproportionately affecting our lower paid workers, particularly those in our feminised industries. Yep. Childcare workers, healthcare workers, aged care workers, cleaners, and workers in the disability and community sector. Not coincidentally, these sectors have also seen an exodus of workers during the pandemic. If things were bad before the pandemic, they are now much, much worse. The pandemic effectively acted like a threat multiplier, much like climate change will too. It blew off those weaknesses and exposed fault lines. Those fault lines were then rent further apart so that they are now wide. And this has led to growing inequality in our society. Although we have record near low unemployment at 3.5%, it hides a dirty secret: moribund wages growth that has just not kept up. It's averaged 2.2% over the last 10 years every year. So we have a tight labour market, but we are not seeing a growth in wages. Why? Because the pipeline of job security is leaky. It is vulnerable to exploitation, to secret pay clauses that affect women, neutered bargaining power, and insurmountable power dynamics. There is just no contest between a cleaner and a CEO. So while wages have tanked, what has actually burgeoned is a growing underclass, effectively a working poor. That's what we have in Australia, a working poor. And there's a term for this that I only discovered during the election, and they're called a precariat. A precariat. They live on the edge of precariousness. And there's about 4 million of these workers who have insecure work, and they have many faces. They're in the gig economy, labour hire, part-time work, or on rolling fixed-term contracts. Let's meet a couple of them. One is Lucy, a woman I met in my electorate of Higgins. She lives in Malvern. She's in her 60s, she's a nurse educator, and she's been on a rolling fixed-term contract now for 10 years. And over that time, she's done pretty well. She's managed to buy a house, a lovely house with a beautiful garden, and she has a cat, and she's had a really good quality of life. And then the pandemic came and her hours were cut. Yep. And you know what happened? She started to fall behind on her mortgage repayments. So when I met her, she was on the edge of losing her home. And she's 2 years off from retirement. So that is the consequence of a human face to a decade of wage suppression. Then, of course, there's Maya, a colleague of mine, someone I met when I was working on the COVID wards at the Alfred Hospital during the Omicron wave in January. Maya is a cleaner, and I met Maya in the change room when we were taking off our scrubs. And there she was, removing a top which was saturated with perspiration. The only part that I could see that was dry was a tiny little hem at the bottom of her scrubs. And I looked at her and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Oh, Michelle, it's my third change for the day." And it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So I knew I was on an enterprise bargaining agreement and I was getting paid well for what I was doing. But Maya, I'm not so sure about. She's a cleaner. And what about all the other people that keep hospitals going? Porters, security guards, the people who turn up when there's a code grey, occupational violence and aggression, the people who sterilise the instruments in the bowels of the hospitals, the people who clean up the laundry. They are almost certainly not on an EBA in the same way that I was. What we are seeing currently with an exodus of low-paid workers from mission-critical industries like healthcare and aged care and early childhood education is a product of misplaced priorities, where low wages were a deliberate design feature of those opposite for over a decade. To me, this is actually something much more sinister. It is a violation of the social contract between people and their leaders. When you come into this House, it is such a privilege, and your job is actually to govern for everyone, for the whole country, not just for a small a thin slice of a sector, your favourites. You don't come in here to govern for your favourites. You govern for everyone. And it was a complete distortion of this value is what we are now reaping over the last 10 years. So the Secure Work Better Pay Bill actually seeks to restore reward for effort. And it tries to even up that field, particularly for men and between men and women. We've heard much about the gender pay gap. It sits at 14.1%, and it's probably an underestimate. And it's been stubbornly resistant to change, stubbornly resistant. And everyone in this House has been bemoaning the fact that, this is a terrible thing and we need to do more about it. We don't need pious proclamations. What we actually need is structural reform to close this gap. And this is what this bill introduces. So it zeroes in on gender equity, zeroes in on it, and makes it a key objective of the Fair Work Act. It means that the Fair Work Commission will now have to apply a gender lens to everything they do. And the Fair Work Commission will be backed up by 2 expert panels, one focused on pay equity and the other focused on the care and community sector, which is disproportionately feminised. We will also outlaw pay secrecy, remove that cloak of secrecy which hides a dirty little secret that women are paid less than men for similar type of work. Casting sunlight over an organisational structure will help make amends. We will also help stamp out sexual harassment by making it easier to make claims to the Fair Work Commission rather than having to go through the courts. We will limit the use of these rolling fixed-term contracts, the same contract that was hobbling Lucy in my electorate, and we will expand access to flexible working arrangements so that Maya, the cleaner in my hospital, can turn up to work at 7 a.m. knowing that she's got someone to look after her children, or maybe she can defer her work a little bit later because her childcare centre hasn't actually opened. We will increase access to bargaining. People on EBAs, like myself in my former life, earn more money than people who are on award wages. In fact, on average, $600 a week more. But only 15% of workers are covered by EBAs. There is a strong emphasis throughout this bill on bargaining and arbitration. But what I've heard over the last few hours and days is that a scare campaign is being waged around strikes or an onerous imposition on small business over complex legislation that we need more time. Australians have already waited 10 years to get to this point. How much more time do you need? The writing is on the wall. And then, of course, there's been complaints about a lack of consultation. Really, we've had 5 months of continuous consultation with peak business groups, with some of the largest employers in our country, with unions, with women's groups, with academic experts, with state and territory ministers, and we've also had a long process of public consultation. We need to end the race to the bottom and end this sort of mentality that when it comes to wages. For too long, workers have been seen as a problem to be managed rather than the social and economic benefit that they are. Our government ushered in an increase to the minimum wage and a wage rise for aged care workers. But leaving it to elections is fraught. There must be a better way, and there is. Reforming the system is what this bill will deliver, so that we end up, as I said in my maiden speech, with healthy, happy workers who make the economy hum. I commend this bill to the House.